The man sitting across from me on the train looked up from his newspaper and said my name. Not, "Excuse me," or "Hey buddy." My actual name. And I had never seen him before in my life. I was 34 years old, riding the 6:47 evening train home like I did every weekday, the same route I'd taken for 6 years. I worked in commercial insurance, the kind of job where you spend your days calculating risk for other people's disasters. I was good at it because I noticed things. Patterns. Small inconsistencies that told a bigger story. It's a useful skill in that line of work. It's a less useful skill in your personal life, because it means you're always watching, always half expecting something to go wrong. That evening was nothing special. I'd had a long day, my collar was too tight, and I was thinking about what to make for dinner, or maybe just not making anything and eating cereal standing over the sink like I did more often than I'd admit to anyone. The train car was maybe a third full. An older woman knitting. 2 teenagers with earbuds in, not talking to each other. And this man, maybe 60, wearing a gray coat, reading a newspaper that I remember thinking looked oddly formal for a commuter train, like a prop from an old movie. I didn't think anything of him until he lowered the paper and said it. "Rough day, Daniel?" I froze. Not because a stranger spoke to me, that happens. But because of how he said it. Casual. Familiar. Like we'd known each other for years and this was just the next line in an ongoing conversation. I told myself he must have overheard someone say my name earlier. Maybe at the station. Maybe he worked near my office and recognized me from somewhere. I have a habit of building explanations quickly, filling in gaps before they have time to feel uncomfortable. It's something I do without noticing, and looking back, that habit is probably the reason the next 20 minutes affected me as much as they did. I gave him a polite nod and looked back at my phone, the universal signal for, "I'd rather not talk." But he kept going. "You're still thinking about the Marlin account, aren't you? The one you undervalued last spring." That stopped me cold. Nobody knew about the Marlin account. Not my co-workers, not my supervisor, not even my wife. I'd made an error early in my career, a miscalculation on a policy that ended up costing the company money when a claim came in higher than projected. I fixed it quietly, absorbed the blame internally, and never told a soul outside of the 2 people in compliance who reviewed it. It had been sitting in the back of my mind for 3 years, a small, private shame I revisited sometimes at 2 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. I remember my first thought wasn't fear. It was something stranger, a kind of vertigo, like the floor of the train had tilted slightly. I asked him, as calmly as I could manage, how he knew that. He just smiled and turned a page of his newspaper, like the conversation was unremarkable. "People carry things," he said. "You can usually tell, if you know what to look for." I wanted to believe that was a deflection. A clever non-answer designed to sound profound while explaining nothing. But something in the way he said it made me sit with it instead of dismissing it. I've spent a career reading risk in numbers, and there's a version of that same instinct that works on people. You learn to notice when someone is giving you a real answer dressed up as a vague one. I should have gotten off at my stop. It was coming up. Instead, I stayed in my seat and asked him who he was. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked me a question of his own, one that has stayed with me since. He asked why I assumed knowing something private about a person had to be threatening. I didn't have a good answer for that in the moment. My default reaction to being seen, really seen, past the version of myself I present at work, at home, in every casual interaction, was defensive. I think most people's is. We spend so much energy managing what other people know about us that when someone bypasses all of that, it doesn't feel like connection. It feels like exposure. He told me his name was Walter, and that he used to work as a hospice counselor, sitting with people in their final weeks. He said after enough years doing that, you start noticing something. People don't talk about their achievements at the end. They talk about the small dishonesties they carried, the moments they pretended to be fine when they weren't, the mistakes they hid instead of admitted, the versions of themselves they performed for other people because the real version felt too risky to show. I asked him again, more pointed this time, how he knew about the Marlin account specifically. And this is the part one still think about. He said he didn't know the details. He'd guessed there was something, a look people get, a particular kind of stillness when they think no one's paying attention. And he'd simply said a name and a phrase that could apply to almost anyone in a stressful job, and let me fill in the rest. I sat there letting that settle. He hadn't read my mind. He'd read my face, my posture, the exhaustion behind my eyes, and made an educated guess dressed in specific-sounding language. And I, someone whose entire profession depends on not jumping to conclusions from incomplete data, had done exactly that. I'd handed him the specific detail myself, in my reaction, in the fear on my face. He never actually said, "Marlin." I did. In my mind, replaying it, I was certain of it, but when I actually traced the conversation back, word by word, I realized I couldn't confirm he'd said it at all. I had assumed it because the fear was already sitting there, waiting for a trigger. That realization didn't come to me on the train. It came about an hour later, sitting in my kitchen, still in my coat, running the conversation over and over. And once I saw it clearly, I felt something between relief and embarrassment. Relief that my secret wasn't actually known. Embarrassment at how quickly, how completely, I had believed a stranger could see straight into the most hidden part of me, and how much that belief revealed about how heavily I'd been carrying it. I think about how much of my life I'd spent assuming other people were watching me the way I watch risk reports, looking for the flaw, the miscalculation, the thing I'd tried to bury. I'd built an entire internal narrative where my mistake defined me, where if anyone truly saw me, they'd see that failure first. And a stranger on a train, using nothing but observation and a well-placed guess, had shown me just how loud that fear was inside my own head. Loud enough that I'd handed him the evidence myself. I never saw Walter again. I looked for him a few times after that, scanning train cars out of habit, half hoping and half dreading another conversation. He never reappeared, at least not that I noticed. I don't know if that was really his name, or if the hospice story was true, or partly true, or something he told strangers to make the moment land. I've stopped needing that part to be true. What mattered wasn't who he was. It was what his questions did. The following week, I told my supervisor about the Marlin account. Not because I had to, the statute on that kind of internal correction had long passed, and no one was asking. I told him because carrying it quietly had become its own kind of weight, and I was tired of managing a secret that, when I finally said it out loud, turned out to be smaller and more forgivable than 3 years of private shame had made it feel. He barely reacted. Said something about how everyone in the department had made a costly error at some point, mine just happened to be one he remembered. That was it. No consequence. No confrontation. Just a mildly interested nod and a return to the conversation he'd been having before I brought it up. I used to think the fear of being truly known was about other people's judgment. I've come to think it's mostly about our own. We assume the worst version of ourselves is the most visible one, the one everyone else can see if they just look closely enough. But most people aren't looking that closely. They're carrying their own version of the Marlin account, replaying their own 2 a.m. thoughts, convinced their private failure is the loudest thing in the room, when really, no one else can even hear it. I still ride that train most evenings. I don't expect to see Walter again, and honestly, I'm not sure it would mean much if I did. What stayed with me wasn't him. It was the 20 minutes where I believed, completely, that a stranger had reached into the most hidden part of my mind, and how much that told me about what I'd been hiding, and who I'd really been hiding it from. I wonder, sometimes, what would happen if we said the quiet things out loud a little sooner. Not to strangers on trains. Just to ourselves, first, and see how much smaller they get in the light.